All right, so this is Next War Vietnam, and I've just completed 2 full game turns now. So this will be the second video I've done. Just going to give you a sense of the gameplay here. I'm probably going to stop at this point and do a restart because I kind of feel like with every single one of these games, it's taken about 2 turns to really get a sense for the flow of how that particular game is going to move, and that will affect how I'm going to set things up. I don't feel like I did the best setup with the Vietnamese defense. So I think a reset is definitely in order. Sometimes you need to see the results of some decisions and see what that's going to do to kind of visualize, is that a good move at this time and so forth. The action this turn is not much happened along the Red River front. This line didn't move a whole lot, except that they did take a city hex here and was able to clear it, got good die rolls on the clearing, and they also cleared the city and the air base at Yen Bai. So the approaches to the western outskirts of Hanoi are it's open to continued advance. The only thing really keeping that from happening is it's a long supply line. If I were continuing the game, I'd probably spend some supply points and create some mobile supply units to keep this pressure up on Hanoi. The biggest breakthroughs, though, were in the north, on the ground anyways, up in the northern sectors. I'll just kind of zoom in a little bit here. The fighting around Dong Dang and what's the other one here? Lang Song. Fighting in this particular area is pretty brutal fighting, but the Chinese were able to roll very good. We're talking like they're rolling 0s, 1s, and 2s in ground combat, which almost didn't even need to throw their air support in to just completely obliterate the Vietnamese ground forces that they're fighting against. And so the Vietnamese took heavy losses that they just can't replace, and they've run out of jungle terrain to defend in, so they've been pushed out into the open here, at least in the center. Pay attention to the road network, guys. The road network is hugely important, so pay special attention to the road network and the supply rules, because that's going to be your key to success with China. The Vietnamese were able to stall the coastal advance in this hex for some time, but breakthroughs off to the west meant that these boys had to pull out of there and begin an organized withdrawal. And so they have fallen back to Ha Long, and so they're guarding the approaches to Haiphong. The Marines now have been sent into the fray to kind of help shore up the defenses north of Haiphong. But if the game were to continue another turn, I would expect the Chinese to probably clear this area and begin to exert meaningful pressure on the urban hexes of Haiphong. Now, just getting into these cities or these urban places doesn't mean you control it. You've also got to do a clearing operation, and so that's always a gamble. It can take a long time, and in this particular game, there are unfavorable modifiers to clearing operations taking place in Vietnam. So do be aware of that. It's not merely walking your units through a hex that's going to give you control of that infrastructure or that location. So that's the situation. There's really no reserves left in Hanoi. They have all been distributed to this sector here. And again, I feel like my setup was not skillful. I probably should put the reserve army units more to the west and the mainline units closer in the center. It's harder to blow them out of the water like it was with the reserve units, the National Guard units. So that's the situation. There's more air bases destroyed. The Vietnamese Air Force has pretty much been KO'd. They've been able to consolidate. They've still got some Su-22s. They've still got some Su-30s, and that's it. They're down to 3 counters left. The U.S. Air Force did rebase from Japan to Vietnam. You can do that in the game, and the reason I did that is because it was uncertain whether or not the Philippines would intervene on the U.S. side, and it kind of felt like sooner rather than later is the time to send the U.S. Air Force to shore up the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. So I sent all of the guys from Vietnam or from Japan to Vietnam. They're now ready to go on turn 3. It takes a whole turn really for them to cycle around and be ready for operations. And so be aware of that pretty much Vietnam's Air Force can be fighting alone for 2 solid turns. But if you can get some Air Force units in Vietnam, now it's going to be a different story on turn 3. Now, having said that, you do have to spend supply points with the U.S. to be able to do that. So every turn costs a supply point to have your units basing in the SRV. So keep that in mind. On the naval front, the Paracels and the Spratlys have been invaded. Airborne units were brought in by helicopters to the Paracels, and they've gotten control of that. They were able to clear that in 1 turn. Heavy fighting for the Spratlys. There is the U.S. Navy starts with an amphibious task force, and so I turned him into a SAG on turn 1 as part of the setup. Just because I didn't have any Marines to play with anyway, so let's have a SAG. And I feel like that's going to be a better fighting piece. So that SAG put up quite a scrap, chased off the Chinese carrier battle group, but was themselves forced to retreat in the face of pressure from the Chinese SAG. And the Chinese amphibious unit that dropped off the Marines on the Spratlys is now converted into a SAG as well. Once you do that, it's permanent. You can't go back. But those 2 guys there are going to be fighting for and trying to maintain control over those sea locations. The amphibious unit that's up here with more Marines tried to get into the Gulf of Tonkin and failed multiple times, and probably should have spent some cruise missiles on the last attempt to at least get them in the Gulf of Tonkin so that you can set up some flanking maneuvers. There's limited approaches here on the coast of Vietnam. This is really the only location to land at, but it might give pause to the SRV reinforcements that'll be entering on turn 3. But either way, they're on hand if they need to reinforce either the Paracels or the Spratlys, and so they're just kind of sitting back for the time being. Still got some airborne units in reserve that have not been used. Figure probably use them here at Yen Bai. Now we captured an air base there. It might be worthwhile to send them in, and they could use some reinforcements on this front to help begin the final push on Hanoi. Back to the strategic situation here. On the international front, the Philippines did, because of the Paracels being invaded, the Philippines have intervened now at level 4, and they joined the Allied side. So they're going to be fighting against China. They've taken Vietnam's side on this, as well as Indonesia and Malaysia. They have both, all 3 of those countries have thrown in with Vietnam. The country of Thailand, however, rolled a 0 for intervention, so they are on the Chinese side, surprisingly enough, and annoyingly enough, so you got them to contend with. I do need to kind of figure out what to do with their ground units. I couldn't figure out where they come in. There's no place for them. So I'll need to look up on the rules how that works, but I imagine they can eventually get to the operational map. These are not units that you can schlep around with ships anyways. So I need to figure out what the story is on those Thai divisions, because you have an armored and 2 infantry divisions. They're not great units, but that can definitely tilt the balance for China if they want to completely KO Vietnam. That those pieces there could be a difference maker. Their air units they're average. They got an F5. They got some JAS 39 and a couple F-16s. So they got an average Air Force. More pieces to the aerial battle that's going to be getting pretty violent now. China's got a pretty good Air Force, but now they're going to have to divert some of their strike aircraft to maintain air superiority. And they're going to have to start throwing in their reserve J7s too to soak up some losses. Carrier F-18s weren't able to accomplish much in the air superiority battle last turn. They were able to abort a J-11, but they themselves were also aborted, so they're not going to be able to fight this time around. But the United States Air Force is going to have some F-15Cs, you got some F-35s, and most importantly, though, you got some F-22s, and those guys can put some real hurt on. You also got some new Wild Weasel units, so and there's some A-10s around. So U.S. has got some good stuff to throw into the air party this coming turn. The B-2 stealths are back, so they can start going to work again on the air defense track. China hasn't been able to really knock this down for the SRV. They've not been able to get the detection down. They got it down one notch, and then it got built back up again. And so the Air Force has been unsuccessful in suppressing air defenses, but they've been winning the air superiority battle, so the AWACS advantage is huge in their favor. But all that changes as more ships come into play. The ASW level has gone up, and so the differential between the sub-threat and the ASW level is such that now the Allied naval task forces can begin to contest control of these locations much more effectively than before. So the naval battle is going to get, I imagine, pretty violent in the next turn or so. So that's the overall situation. The Philippines doesn't have much of an air force. They just got some. I think that's an indigenously produced aircraft, the FA-50 unit. It's cannon fodder. Let's face it. The Malaysian Air Force, much more impressive. You got a couple F-16s, F-18s, Su-30s, and MiG-29s. And then you have the Indonesians, Su-35s, F-16s, and Su-30s. So probably throw just about all of those guys into the air superiority battle and just try to stretch China and get this AWACS level down, and then use the B-2s to really start hammering away at the air defense track. On the Special Forces front, one last thing. The Chinese had terrible luck the last turn with their Special Forces. So 3 of their 6 teams have been eliminated. They're going to get another team, I think, on next turn. But they only got 3 teams to play with. Raids are costly, but they might just have to go ahead and start using those to target the air defense track and try to knock that down. Getting this from the 7 to the 6 is that's a whole column shift. So that might be worth the danger to the teams to affect that. On the other side of things, while the Allies are not able to bring a whole lot of ground units to support Vietnam, they are able to bring quite a few special operations forces. So they need to, I think as the Allied player, you got to use these guys effectively. You're probably going to have more softs to play with, and so you better know how to use those softs effectively, because the Chinese are going to have more ground troops than you can bring to bear. And it'll take time for the U.S. to intervene at a level where they can start bringing in some heavy U.S. units. For the time being, there's just a couple of Marines that could perhaps contest the Spratlys or the Paracels, but that's it. Got a whole Vietnamese Corps coming up from the south, but most of those are ground units, 4 movement points. You don't have the initiative, so they're going to move on highway alone. You're going to move, 16 hexes is as far as they're going to be able to get. So they'll be able to get to Hanoi, but probably aren't going to be able to do a lot to hold on to any of the jungle terrain north of the cities. So that is the overall situation at the end of 2 full turns. Definitely a fun system. China's probably going to need to either repair this airfield here. They didn't capture this one for a couple of reasons. They never got into that hex. But getting an air base, even going up here and getting the city, just being able to get a base for your attack choppers, I think is something worthwhile going after. And so it's something that I'll probably do with China, is go ahead and repair this guy here, because being able to repair that allows us to base these attack choppers onto the hex grid. It's 7 movement points from the shaded section to the hex grid, so half of their movement or half of their range is lost, and so the front has moved beyond the range of their attack choppers pretty much everywhere. So, but this guy will be able to rebase at Yen Bai, and so they'll be able to use that probably on turn 4 then. But these guys will probably be out of use, not going to be able to be of much use until probably turn 5. Now the game could end with a UN roll. We have let's see, a modifier of 1 to the UN resolution. So if the UN decides to intervene and shut the war down, It could end before the turn 3 really gets underway. That's a possibility. I think you got to roll like a 10, and so there is a +1 modifier to that, and so that could happen. If that were to happen and the game ended right now, the PRC has enough victory points, actually, I think, to win a substantive victory. They've got quite a few points, and so if it ended right now, China would definitely win. It wouldn't be decisive, but it would be a meaningful victory for them. And so at that point, I think I would go along with the resolution, accept the resolution. If you deny the resolution, you're just giving up points. And I think that if it goes into a third turn, their Air Force is going to start getting chewed up, and they're going to find the victory points are going to start tilting back the other way, and that's something that they don't really want to see that happen. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you play the game. If you're in a winning position, maybe it's a good thing if the UN steps in and tries to shut the war down. So there you go. That is Next War, Vietnam. After 2 full turns of play, missed a bunch of rules. I'll do another video here to show you some of the rules that I miss that are easy to miss, and we'll take a look at those next time around.